Hey guys, welcome back to another video. After months of doing these monthly Senate predictions and recently weekly Senate predictions, it is now time to make my final forecast for the 2024 U.S. Senate elections. So, of course, we have 34 seats up for grabs in 2024. Senators have a 6-year term, so it throws it all off. They're not all up for re-election at one point. So 34 seats up for grabs. Democrats currently have whoops, we can go to the Senate races here. Democrats currently have 51 seats in the Senate to the Republicans 49 after the 2022 midterm elections. They had 50 before and they gained the seat of Pennsylvania and held all their other seats. So they're up to 51. Now what's important is that I have Kamala Harris winning the presidency. This is my forecast. So what that means regarding the Senate races is that Democrats only need 50 seats in the Senate. That's because in the occurrence of a tie, the vice president, in this case Tim Walz, cast the tie-breaking vote. So all Democrats need for majority in the Senate is 50 seats, while Republicans need 51. So that is important context. So with that being said, let's head right into it with this Senate forecast. Now, things have changed very recently, especially after the Seltzer poll in my presidential forecast. So that, has really changed my Senate predictions, and it is actually much more favorable for Democrats than it was just a week or two ago. So, of course, what hasn't changed is the safe Democratic states. We maybe can add one more, actually. We've got California. Adam Schiff will beat Steve Garvey there. We've got Maria Cantwell winning re-election in Washington. Mazie Hirono in Hawaii. You have got Delaware. Don't even know who the guy is, honestly. Connecticut, my Senator Chris Murphy will win re-election. White House in Rhode Island, Warren in Massachusetts, Gillibrand in New York, Bernie Sanders in Vermont, Angus King in Maine. King and Sanders both are independents, but they caucus with the Democrats, so we'll just characterize them as Democrats. You've got Andy Kim in New Jersey. You've actually got a state we usually don't characterize quite as safe, but you've got Amy Klobuchar, very popular in Minnesota. She's on track to win by over 15%. By the way, safe margins are 15% or higher. And then you've actually got one more, or actually you got two more. You've got number one. This might shock some people, maybe not though. Angela also Brooks in Maryland. Now, this one people thought was going to be competitive because Larry Hogan, the former governor, who's a Republican but was extremely popular, is running. And look, he led for quite a while in the race. You could see the first polls had him ahead by a lot, by 15 points. This was looking like a key race that Republicans could flip. But since then, of course, voters have gotten much more partisan. Also, Brooks leads by 10, but I believe when they actually go to the polls, voters will be even more partisan than they claim to be in the polls, and also Brooks will win by more than 15. And then you've actually got one more for the first time ever. Virginia is a safe state for Tim Kaine. He wins re-election. GOP candidate in Virginia, just an absolute disaster. Now, as for the Republicans, they have some as well. They've got Utah, of course. That is what's his face? I forget. Whatever, doesn't matter. North Dakota, Wyoming, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi. I'm actually gonna hold off. I think on Missouri. Missouri's a little iffy. Nebraska Senate special election there, but the general election, the regular election, is very close. That we'll get to in a moment. That one's really interesting. They've got Indiana and West Virginia as well. So after safe states, 15% higher margins, 15% or higher margins, Republicans are at 46 seats. Democrats are at 42. Of course, Republicans need 51 for majority, considering that Democrats win the presidency in my forecast. So they need 5 of the remaining seats to win, while Democrats need 8, because they only need to get to 50 since they have the VP slot. So we have 12 remaining seats that will be closer than 15-point margins. So starting with the Democrats, they have quite a lot, and this might surprise you. Here is where you will start to see major changes from the updates I've made in my presidential forecast, as you can see right here. That's not Senate, that's presidential. So first of all, Martin Heinrich will win by a lot in New Mexico, but probably not by quite a safe margin. But here we go. Ready? I'm just going to do them all at once, so be prepared. Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are all likely Democrat. There was once a time where the blue wall was looking very good for Democrats, but that was months and months ago. But, for the past few months, it would have been completely unreasonable for you to characterize all three of these as likely Democrat. When you look at the polling, a lot of them look pretty close. Look at Michigan. Alyssa Slotkin, the Democrat, is only ahead by 4 points. But again, with a slight polling error, that could change. You've got Bob Casey in Pennsylvania. He's only ahead by 3 points when you round. And of course, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin has the closest race of all. One time didn't look very competitive, right? The average of polls had her up by 7. However, today, she only leads by 2.3%. But I think as of now, they're all likely margins. And this really ties back to the Seltzer poll. The Seltzer poll, it might be up right here. Yeah. Just an absolute insane win for Kamala Harris in a poll that gets it spot on. The gold standard of polls, J. Ann Seltzer, conducted it. And this directly translates to how Democrats will perform in the Midwest. I'm sorry, the Rust Belt, that is. In 2016, you could clearly see how Iowa shifted, also followed with, followed and basically connected, was intertwined, very similar to how Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, the rest of the Sun Belt, oh my God, Rust Belt, shifted as well. So to see Iowa shifting 11 points to the left in America's most accurate pollster in the state of Iowa, that's really stunning. And that carries down, to one, Harris across the Rust Belt states, the other Rust Belt states. Number two, Democrats down ballot. In the end, I think that people are caring way too much about these three races. In the end, I don't think that they will be all that competitive. And on top of that, you have very strong Democrats in all three of these races. Michigan is a little iffy. You could very well argue that Alyssa Slotkin is not much of a good candidate. But what 2022 showed us was that if there's a strong Democratic incumbent running for re-election, right, in the Senate or whatever, or governor, whatever it may be, in the era of, MAGA Republicanism, they should win, right? Unless something crazy happens. If it is a pretty split swing state, they should win if they are the incumbent and they are well liked. Tammy Baldwin, Alyssa Slotkin, Bob Casey, all well liked across these three states. I would be absolutely shocked if any of them flipped. And then you've got Nevada and Arizona in the Southwest, which uh, are insanely uncompetitive. I mean, just look at Arizona. Arizona, the Republicans decided to nominate the worst candidate possible. It's only an average of 4.4% because you've had a couple of Republican pollsters, I mean, completely biased pollsters, show Carrie Lake in the lead, right? Like Atlas Intel, and then Patriot Polling shows a close race, and then On Message showed an even race, and then Atlas Intel again. But among the actual reputable pollsters, it's not even close. I mean, Gallego is winning by 15 points in some polls. That's insane. Then for some reason, the Republican candidate in Nevada is just awful. Don't know why, but as a candidate, this one isn't competitive at all. I mean, again, you had a couple really biased Republican pollsters come in and narrow up that average, like SNR, but right before that, Rosen was ahead by like 9 points. That's what I think the margin will be about. Very confident in both those calls, likely margin there. So now let's move on to likely Republican states, and they just have one, Missouri, Josh Hawley. Not quite safe, but very much on track to win. This one shouldn't be competitive. So that means that the rest of these states are lean or tilt. So we'll go on to lean states. These are 1 to 5% margins for either party. Now, this is crunch time, right? Now, this is the last remaining 5 states. And what you notice, you've got Montana, Nebraska, Texas, Florida, and Ohio, all 5 Republican states. In 2 of them, Democrats have incumbents. So that's a problem. But still, even if just those 2 lose, Republicans are only, or what am I saying? I don't know. They'd be at 52 seats. I don't know why I said that. But in 2 of them, you've got Democratic incumbents. So that should be scary to them. But what also should be concerning for Republicans is that we've already characterized as likely margins critical swing states like the blue wall in Arizona and Nevada. These should not be likely margins. And what should also be concerning is that the remaining states are all Republican states where they should already have incumbents who are leading by a lot. So, on the surface, it's very weak showing for Republicans. But there is a small silver lining in Montana and Ohio that would give Republicans an easy majority. So, with that being said, let's characterize our one lean Democratic state and another Democratic incumbent survives, Sherrod Brown. There was only a brief time when I had Sherrod Brown losing, and what Harris has been able to do is really recover, her numbers in the Rust Belt. That's what Seltzer's poll uh, released was shown. And we've actually had multiple polls now from Ohio show an increasingly close race. There was a poll recently that had Trump only ahead by 3. So, Sherrod Brown should outperform Kamala Harris by something like 8 points, right? That's what we're expecting. Sherrod Brown, the incumbent, of course, that's just expected. So, as long as Kamala Harris is winning by a relatively narrow margin, you know, anything like the +3 in Iowa would be ideal, considering that Iowa and Ohio voted for Trump by the same amount in 2020, 8 points. That'd be ideal, and it would produce an easy Sherrod Brown victory. I don't know. I have it as a 1 point margin for Trump, and the more I think about it, the more outrageous it sounds. But it's just because, I'm still in disbelief over the Seltzer poll. But regardless, if it's 1 point or if it's a 5 point margin, Sherrod Brown should win the race in Ohio, and I'm pretty confident on that one. A very weak Republican nominee there. So Republicans have, well, I won't reveal how many lean states they have, but now we'll get into lean Republican states, 1 to 5% margins, and we have 4 states remaining, all of them pretty Republican. Let's do it now. So we've got Florida. That one Rick Scott hangs on. This shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. There was at one point where it sort of looked competitive. The Democrat Debbie Mucarsel Powell looked somewhat competitive at one point, 4% margin. But the polling does not look bad for Democrats here. But then again, 2022 showed us how Florida is a real Republican stronghold, right? In 2022, Rubio, the senator, won re-election by 16 points there in Florida. So it was a real shock. How solidified Florida became for the Republican Party. So I don't think that Debbie Mucarsel Powell has enough to win the state of Florida, especially considering that Kamala Harris probably is not winning the state of Florida or even coming within a point or even 2 points. So Florida, I think, will go to Rick Scott in the end. Now, this one is honestly just a sign of weakness of how weak Republican candidates could be if they're faced by a strong candidate, because you got Nebraska. Now Nebraska, I think Deb Fisher, this one will really shock people in terms of how close it is. But you've got the incumbent Deb Fisher, the Republican, who is being opposed by an independent candidate. The Democrats chose not to field a candidate in Nebraska, and they didn't even officially endorse this independent Dan Osborne, who's a local union leader, very progressive on economics. They didn't even choose to endorse him because they knew, seeing him on the Democratic ballot line, that would hurt his chances in the election, considering how Republican Nebraska is. So Dan Osborne has been able to run this insanely, insanely strong campaign. I don't know how he did it, considering that he doesn't have any political experience and doesn't seem like his team does either. But he has run this phenomenal campaign where he is highlighting, his support for Trump in that rural third congressional district, while in the Democratic second congressional district, highlighting his work as a union leader, as progressive on economics. And it is so far an insanely effective strategy, because when you look at Nebraska, nobody could have expected how close this race is. Now, the vast majority of polls are done by internals. So the latest internal for Dan Osborne shows an even race. The latest internal for Deb Fisher shows her up by 8. But when you look at the nonpartisan polls, let's do that. Now, in the New York Times, they released one poll among likely voters and one among registered voters. Among likely voters, which of course is more accurate to the results, Fisher is only ahead by 2 points. But among registered voters, sorry, that was among likely voters. Among registered voters, Dan Osborne is ahead by a point. That's insane. But then, just a couple days later, we had a YouGov poll released, and Fisher was ahead by 7. Overall, there's not enough to point towards a Dan Osborne victory. There's just not. An upset is absolutely possible. If there are some shy Osborne voters, I don't know. But an upset is absolutely possible in Nebraska. And after we characterize the Montana and Texas, we'll talk about the significance if Dan Osborne is elected to the Senate. So now we've got Montana and Texas, and one of them, I believe, is lean for the Republican Party. That would put them at 50 seats, and I think it's Montana. Now, this race has gotten very increasingly competitive in the past week or so because we had a batch of new polls really show a competitive race in Montana and, essentially show that with a slight polling error, the incumbent here, yes, Montana, despite it being deep red, does have an incumbent Democrat representing the state in the Senate. But what was I going to say? But yeah, we had a batch of new polls. Sheehy, the Republican, was beating the incumbent Democrat Tester by 3 points in Emerson, +1 in whatever this is. And then in the Montana State University, it was even. So, these latest polls in the final stretch of the campaign really shed a positive light on this race, but it has never looked good for John Tester. It has always been, an unlikely race for him. And considering the fact that Trump is on track to win Montana, something similar to the 16 points he won it by in 2020, I don't think that there's a path to victory because of how partisan voters are. Montana's one thing. Montana voted for Trump by 8. He'll probably win it by much less this year. Sherrod Brown could hang on. There are enough split ticket voters. But in a state that's going to vote for Trump by something like 15 or 14 or 15 points in 2024, not enough voters are split ticket. They might say they are in polls, but come election day, this happens election after election after election. Voters are less partisan in how they enter polls than they are in when it comes to actually voting on election day. So Montana, I just don't see a path to victory for John Tester. I think that one is lean Democrat. And then you've got Texas. Republicans are at 50, Democrats are at 49. It all comes down to Texas. Whoever wins Texas wins control of the Senate. Now, I really don't think that Democrats can win the state of Texas. I think that in a few elections it will absolutely be in reach, but as of now, it just isn't there. It just isn't there. I mean, in the last election, Trump won it by 5.6%. I don't even think with the new Seltzer poll, Harris can, Harris is in reach of flipping Texas blue. But when it comes to the Senate race, there is some hope. Because, of course, in the Senate race, Ted Cruz is a much weaker candidate than Donald Trump, and Colin Allred is probably a stronger candidate than Kamala Harris. Now, in 2018, 2018, they do give us polls, I think. What? Let's see. Yes, we do get some polls in 2018. And as you can see, it doesn't give us an average here for some reason, but I'll tell you the average. The average was something like Cruz +6 or something like that. In the state of Texas. Now he ended up only winning by 2.5% against Beto O'Rourke. Again, this is 2018 in his last re-election bid. He was expected to win by 5 or 6 or something like that. He ended up only winning by 2.5. So that was about a 3 to 4% overestimation of Ted Cruz in this race. Now, when you look at 2024 in the average of polls here, he's only ahead by 3.4. So if he's overestimated by the same amount as he was in 2018, then Colin Allred is elected senator. Texas is flipped blue. That's important. That is so important to keep in mind. And honestly, the thing is, it's hard to say who's underestimated and overestimated in polls like these, in Senate polls. It just is, especially in a presidential year when the last election was a Senate year. But I think that this race will be extremely close. I mean, right now I'm just debating between whether to put it as tilt or to put it as lean. And I don't think that there is enough in a presidential year. This partisanship thing comes back. Yes, there will be split ticket voters, but will there be enough to make it razor thin? I think that Ted Cruz wins by just over 1 percentage point to make Texas a lean state, just over 1 point. So therefore, Republicans win majority in the Senate, 51 seats. Democrats win 49. So Democrats, I have winning the presidency and I have winning the House. Republicans in the Senate stop a Democratic trifecta. Now, when it comes to an error in my forecast, in my Senate forecast, it helps Democrats. If there is a slight error in my forecast, you could see that I have 4 lean Republican states, only 1 lean Democratic state. The 5 closest states, 4 of them are Republican. So with just a slight with a slight error in my forecast, Colin Allred could win in Texas. Boom, they have majority. If not, John Tester could hang on in Montana. They have majority, or both. Or John Tester could win Montana. Colin Allred could win in Texas, and they have 51 seats. Imagine how insane that would be. Or we've got Dan Osborne in Nebraska. If Dan Osborne pulls out an upset, wins Nebraska, nobody wins majority. Can you imagine that? Again, Republicans lose the presidency, so they can't cast the tie-breaking vote. So Senate majority comes down to how Dan Osborne votes. That's pretty incredible. That would be really insane to think about. But as of now, this is literally my final forecast, 51 to 49. So thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe down below, drop a comment to let me hear your thoughts on this, and I'll see you all later.